Hello, welcome to Canyons Church Online. We are so glad to have you with us today. My name is Andrew. I want you to know a few things before we get started. First of all, we're starting a brand new series today. It's called Love Thy Neighbor. And this is actually a series, it's 2 parts, but it's going to lead into a third Sunday, which is our 4LCV Sunday. This is where we give, serve, and love intentionally in our community. Then we're going to have this whole entire initiative that is going to launch a wave of generosity into the LC Valley and make sure that they know that God is for them, and so are we. So that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. You're not going to want to miss that. That's October 24th. But for the time being, we're going to go through Love Thy Neighbor for the next 2 weeks. A little bit more information is that we're going to be here for just about an hour. And if you actually have been here before, you watched us before, I would love for you to take a step. If you would consider to engage with us somehow, some way, whether that is, emailing us or commenting on the post or sharing this post with someone else, or maybe the next step for you might be to start engaging and giving generously somewhere, somehow, some way. I say this at church all the time. I don't care if you give at Canyons Church. I give at Canyons because I believe that that's what is in line with my heart for our community, what I believe is in line with God's heart. But I just want you to be generous because generosity opens the door for God to do something in you. So whether it's generosity or maybe it's baptism, maybe you've thought about getting baptized before and this is something that you're kind of wrestling with, we'd love to have a conversation with you about baptism, regardless of where you're at. We just want to help you take that next step, whether the next step may be even to just sit and listen or watch this next message that we're about to start. So I hope you stick around. I hope you enjoy this. And I hope that you engage with our mission, which is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And you're doing that right now. Thanks for being here. Have you ever actually caused yourself pain because of your resentment towards someone before? Like you just had this disdain towards them and you couldn't not behave a certain way and it ended up causing you pain? I have. Multiple times actually, but one of the most prominent times was when I was young. I was just learning how to ride my bike. I think we took the training wheels off a little, maybe the year before. So I was getting comfortable with my bike. My sister Sarah and I were riding back and forth. We lived on a cul-de-sac, and it kind of started off, when you entered the cul-de-sac, you're up high, and then it dropped down low, and that's where our driveway was, and then it went back up on the other side. The end of the cul-de-sac was high again, so kind of this high, low, high. So we'd ride our bikes back and forth through that little valley area. And there was a neighbor towards the end of the street. His name was Donnie. He was, I believe, a year older than me. And let's just put it this way. I didn't have a lot in common with Donnie. You see, when I was growing up, especially at that young age, I wanted to be perfect. No, literally, I wanted to be perfect. So each day I would kind of take inventory of any mistakes, any sins, anything that I absolutely could think of that I did wrong. And I would pray about it. I would ask God for forgiveness, and I would promise to do better the next day. I mean, I wanted to be perfect. Donnie was not. You know this. There's a truth here. When you can't aim at perfection and not notice where everyone else is aiming, when you're just solely focused on where you're aiming and you think that that's perfect, and then you look around and you realize that everyone else is off the page, they're not even on the same target that you are. There's a correlation between us desiring perfection and our judgmental mindset that we immediately adopt without even trying. It just comes naturally. We're gifted at judgmentalism, aren't we? So I'm a young kid. I'm trying to do the best. I'm trying to be the best. I'm trying to be perfect. Donnie, he's just different. He dresses different. The cleanliness of their home compared to ours was different. The language that he used was different. I mean, I didn't understand a lot of the things that came out of his mouth. I just knew that I couldn't repeat them at home. So I just didn't want to be around Donnie at all. So Sarah and I were riding our bike, and we went up to one side of the cul-de-sac, and we kind of took a break up there. And during the break, Donnie and a couple of his friends came down the road, and they actually stood down by our driveway, down towards the bottom of the valley. And Sarah and I looked at each other like, oh no, it's Donnie. We don't want to talk to him. We don't even want to be by him. So we came up with this brilliant plan. I don't even know if it was Sarah's idea or mine, but we decided we would ride as fast as we could down the hill and then turn really fast, 90-degree from pavement to gravel up the driveway. Sarah was a little bit older, so she went first, and she made it. And I think she went up just far enough that it would be awkward for them to kind of like yell at her to talk to her, but she was still watching me to make sure that her younger brother made it through. So I, gear up, and I'm getting myself psyched out. And this is also just perspective. We weren't wearing helmets, so that was an era that you could just do whatever you wanted, and if you got hurt, you got hurt. We weren't trying to not get hurt. Anyway, so I got myself all psyched out and go down the hill. In my mind, if I was to go fast, if we were trying to go as fast as we could, that meant no brakes. That meant that I literally was going maximum speed. Like I was trying to do everything in my power to go as fast as I could. And I got down to the bottom of the hill, and I was going fast, and I turned the corner, and I definitely did not know how to counter steer or to lean into it or any of that, and I was thrown immediately from my bike over the handlebars straight into like this briar patch. And it was almost like a bullet, like it spins, it spirals, or a football, and just shot out of Peyton Manning's arm, like just a football direct shot into the briar patch. I'm spinning, rotating, and it wasn't that I landed on top of the bushes, it's that I went like into them spinning. I had like these weird kind of cool like scratch marks all over, bloody. It was a mess. I was a mess. Then I had to turn around and climb out. While I'm doing that, and I'm crying a little bit, while I'm doing that, I hear Donnie and his friends, and they're again using the language that I didn't understand and knew that I couldn't repeat. And I was like, in my mind, right? In my self-righteous mind at that young age, I was like, see, that's exactly why I wanted to go as fast as I could and not talk to them, because I didn't want to hear them say those words. Anyway, you ever have those moments where you realize later on that there's something about understanding a principle, but it's entirely different to behave and act it out in your life? That's really what we're talking about in this series. There's two elements of this series that we're going to talk about. One of them is changing our perspective and our mindset. That's what we're talking about today. And the next week, it's about the action. But I don't think if you only have the mindset or only the action, you're not doing the full shift. It takes both, and it starts with the mindset. You see, at this point in my life, I was, my family was great. We checked all the boxes about being a good Christian family. Like we went to church as often as we possibly could. If the church was open, we were there. We served, we gave, we did whatever we possibly could do. In fact, the message I'm going to give next week, the primary illustration is the Good Samaritan. I could have, at this age, I was probably like 6 or 7 years old, I could have given this talk already at that age. Like I could have told you exactly what Jesus said, that it was a parable. I could have talked to you about it. I could have given you the principles and kind of what it actually meant. But as much as I understood it, I wasn't living it up. I mean, look at what I had just done. And yet I was trying to justify my behavior immediately. But this is the situation that we all find ourselves, whether you're 6, 7 years old or 67 years old. Like we are all in that same spot where we naturally tend to see others in a light that is different than our own, don't we? And here's the idea, the main principle of this series. It's not very difficult to figure out. It's love thy neighbor, right? But here's what I do know. That if we're not actually, if you're a Jesus follower and you're not doing this, then you're not following Jesus well, right? If you're not doing this, you're not doing a great job following Jesus. And that sounds kind of harsh, but that's the reality, because loving your neighbor is following Jesus. That's what that looks like. If you want to ask someone, hey, what does it look like to follow Jesus? That's what it looks like, loving the people around you. Have you heard that before, love thy neighbor? I'm sure most of you probably have. Love thy, that's like the King James version of the statement, but do you know who said it? Well, let me give you a hint. It's been around even before Jesus. It was around. It was around for a long, long time. This is just a known. No one hears love thy neighbor or love your neighbor. No one hears that and they're like, oh my gosh, that's a that is a new original idea. Let me write that down. I've never thought of that before. No, this is common. It's almost cliche at this point. But love thy neighbor, it takes on a new meaning in light of what Jesus says about this. So Jesus does mention this at one point. I mean, he mentions it probably multiple times, but it's recorded in history, in the scriptures at one point. And in the context of this conversation, Jesus is in a crowd. Jesus' ministry has been up and running for a while now, and he's got he's got some crowds. He's got some people that are following him, and the religious leaders hate that, right? Because they're losing authority, they're losing power, they're losing influence to this like rebel rabbi that's going around, and he's doing things different, he's talking different, and they don't like that. So they understood that if they just came against Jesus overtly and just decided he's done, he's not in our system, this isn't going to work, if they did that, they were afraid that it would cause riots, that there would be even more people that would side with Jesus. So they decided that the best way to do this would be to undermine his authority. So they thought that they could try to catch him like in wordplay and try to catch him saying the wrong thing or take something out of context. But if you've read the New Testament, you know that strategy does not work out for them. And this is one of those moments. So you have a religious leader of the day, he's a teacher of the law, and he asks Jesus this question in front of the crowd. What's the greatest commandment? Like, what's the number one commandment? And he's hoping that Jesus is going to say something, he's going to slip up, and he's going to be able to argue and defend and all that stuff. Well, Jesus, he looks at the man and he says, well, what we're going to read in just a second. But this question is interesting. What's the greatest commandment? First of all, anytime that you're looking to define the rules even further in life or like in a game, have you noticed this? That when you're new to a game, you're just learning the game, the people that understand the rules first are able to like strategize around them, manipulate them, and make sure that they can utilize them to their best advantage. It's all strategy. That's kind of like in life, though, also. Like the better that we understand the rules, the more that we're able to gain influence or power or leverage or whatever it might be because of the rules. In addition to this, as Jesus talks about this, something unique happens. We actually see Jesus' love, and we see God's heart through this all. We see Jesus' values and God's heart through Jesus' response. There's this mindset that it's been around a long time, and it's still around today. I mean, literally, this mindset has been around since the beginning of time. Since men have walked the earth, this mindset has been here. We recognize as people that we don't have control over everything. As advanced as our society is and technology is right now, we still understand that there's things that are out of our control. And typically, and this is through history, we recognize that there's things that are out of our control, and there's something greater than us that may have an effect over what we don't have control over. And so, essentially, the mindset is this, that we, in different societies, have used different names for that, but essentially it's God, it's a deity, it's something supernatural. And if we can try to get that thing, right, this is the reality, this is the idea that people try to latch onto. If I can get on God's good side, he will do some good on my side. Have you ever tried to do this? Have you ever set out a goal like, if I could just do good enough, if I just showed up to church enough, or maybe if I gave enough, or maybe if I served enough, or if I was just nice enough, that I could get God on my side. And if God's on my side, then maybe he'll do some good for me on my behalf. Maybe he'll adjust some of the situations I find myself in, the circumstances that I face right now. Maybe he'll do something about that. Essentially, you're trying to manipulate a situation to still control a situation that you have no control over. And like I said, Jesus' answer to this question, what's the greatest commandment, even though that the man's motivation was skewed, right? His motivations weren't pure for this question, but Jesus, he takes advantage of this moment. He actually, again, we see the values of Jesus in the heart of God because of his response. And in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, this is what Jesus says. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." Essentially, this is a given, like this was the token answer. For a good Jewish scholar, for anybody that had studied the Jewish culture, if anybody had read the Torah, if anyone read the law and the prophets, if they understood it, this was the given answer. This is what you were supposed to say. Essentially, it's that you're supposed to prioritize your relationship with God over your heart, meaning your emotions, your soul, your spirit, your mind, your intellect, that ultimately you're to love God, not love like the emotion of love, but the decision of love. You're to love God, to submit to God with all that you are, that He is the priority over all that you are. So that's a good answer, right? The next answer, and he continues on, he says, the second is like it, not second in importance, but the second answer that I'm giving this to you. It's kind of interesting. The man asked for one answer, and Jesus is like, well, here's my full thought on that. Let me just go beyond this. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. And again, that idea was common. Like that's a known statement. That's a known priority. That's a known law within the Jewish culture. But then Jesus says something that he adds to this that changes the entire perspective. He says, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. That's Jesus' addition. Like that is Jesus adding to the given answer. He's adding context to those answers. That if you take up all of the law and the prophets, this is, not just the 10 commandments, this is the over 600 laws that the Jewish people had in place in order to be made right. Like if you take all of those, they could all, they all come from these two commands, to love God essentially and to love your neighbor, to love people. It's those two things. Later on we'll see that Jesus he even boils it down to just one. But if you ask the question, what do I need to do in order to love God? It's to love people. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's one of the best ways that you can express your love for God, is by your love for others. Love other people that God created. So here's the big question. Who is your neighbor? And we're going to get into some specifics next week, but we will talk about this a little bit today as well. Who's your neighbor? Right? And for our purposes today, this is what we're going to wrap our minds around. This is what we're going to look at. Our neighbor is someone in the ripple effect of your life. Someone in the ripple effect of your life. This means that anybody that you come into contact with, anybody that you have relationship with, family member, they live in your house, the actual neighbor across the street, the coworker, anybody, the people that you come into contact on your drive to work, the people that you're in line behind at the grocery store. Like everybody is someone that within proximity that you have a ripple effect. Even people that you don't know can actually be your neighbor in this context. Now let's look at the idea that immediately comes to our mind when we say our neighbor, the adjacent property residers. Let's just start there, right? The adjacent property residers. Who's our neighbor? Well, the people that live right next to us. And man, when you think of your neighbor, is the first thought that comes to your mind, it is so easy to love them? Man, I love them so much. Is that the first thought that you have? Not typically, right? Not typically. Choosing to love someone it's hard. It's not easy. In fact, if you're married, you promise someone that you would adjust yourself to them, that you would alter what is natural to you in order to submit and in order to prioritize somebody else over yourself. And you have a ring on your finger to prove that you've made that commitment, and they've made that commitment to you. And it's still not easy, right? It can still be difficult some days. It can still be hard work sometimes. Why? Because we like to see the world and do the things in the world that we like to do. We like it our way. We don't want to adjust to somebody else's way. Your spouse has a ring on their finger. Your neighbor does not, right? They have not made that commitment to you. They have not promised to you in front of God and their friends and family that they're going to default to you, that they're going to defer to you, No. What do our neighbors do? they decide that it's time to cut the grass right in the middle of our nap time. Like, what are they doing? What are they thinking? They know that every single Saturday at this time, I like to lay down on the couch and turn whatever, turn on golf and fall asleep to the beauty. And all I hear instead is the lawnmower. It just keeps me awake. I can't believe they do this all the time. Or maybe maybe you're sick and they hear about it somehow and they knock on your door to check on you and they're like, oh, we just wanted to see how you're doing. And you're like, well, I was asleep, but now you got me up. And that's the only thing that made me feel good in the last 48 hours. But here I am, right? Oh, our neighbors. Or maybe if this is coming up, we've got Halloween just right around the corner. Seems like there's only two camps when it comes to Halloween. Either you're all in or you're all out. Either you're decorating your house and you've got the candy for the kids and you're ready for the trick-or-treaters and you think it's so much fun, or you you turn the lights off on Halloween and you tiptoe around the house and you make sure that as soon as someone walks off of the street towards your home, you turn the TV off so there's no like blue glow on the wall. Like you try to hide that you're home. Everybody knows that you're home. Your car's in the driveway, but you want to make sure you don't want to answer the door because why? You didn't get candy, because you didn't want any trick-or-treaters. Your neighbor did. They went all out. You didn't. However you see this, isn't this true? If you look around your neighborhood, you have both of those examples probably in your neighborhood right now. Well, if anyone's decorated for Halloween yet. Anyway, neighbors just do things different. They do things their way, not ours. And that makes it difficult sometimes to love them. But everybody that we come into contact is a neighbor. And so when we think of our coworker, is it hard to love them or is it easy? Maybe some of both. I don't know. All these different people that can't figure out the speed limit, the people that can't figure out the card reader at the grocery store, the people that you just, it's them. As soon as you come into proximity, you're like, I'm going to have a story about this later on to tell my wife that this is going to be awful. I just have to endure the next 15 minutes because this is, God, give me the patience. I need it right now, right? The amazing part of all of this is that God actually has something to say about our neighbors. In fact, Jesus knew this, and Jesus did something about this. And the first century Christians knew something, and they did something about it. They watched it. They lived this out. And leaders throughout history, if you look back, they knew that this principle that I'm about to say, they knew that this truth that I'm about to say, it can do something greater than we expect. Ultimately, that loving our neighbor has the power, the ability to change our world. And if you look around the world and you're like, all hope is lost, you want to change your world? Start loving your neighbor. Start loving your neighbors. And yes, those adjacent property residers, but also everybody else that you have a ripple effect in their life. Like you might not even know them, but how can you better love them? There's this, I learned at an early age this illustration. When I was, in the Powell household, you did not get an allowance. You had chores to do, but there's no financial reimbursement for them. It's just if you wanted a bed in that home, you did your chores. That's just the way it was. You were part of the Powells. You did the Powell work. So, and I was good with that. I was fine with that. I kind of liked being out working with my dad. He'd come home from school. We'd both go out and rake the leaves or whatever it might be, go cut the wood. Like we did stuff together. I worked right alongside my dad. That's just the way that life was. At some point, I learned that I could do those same things outside of my home, and actually my hard work turned into hard cash. Like I could exchange my sweat and my labor for money. Like there is value in it. That ultimately, how valuable something is by what someone is willing to pay for it. And when I was young, I learned like that first paycheck that I got, I held in my hand and I looked, I was like, I just earned this. Like this is now my money because I spent some time like working a little bit like that. I do that anyway. Like I work anyway. That's what I do. I go home and I do my schoolwork, and then I play sports and I work. Like I do physical labor. I make sure things are right and good around the house, any chores that I have to do. So I learned this, that there's a value to my hard work and my labor. And what it is valued is not what I valued it at, but what someone is willing to pay for it. Now, there's another pastor. He's in the Atlanta area, and he's part of the North Point Partnership and network of churches. His name is Jamie Dickens, and he has this great illustration proving this point. He was at church one day, and it was right around the time, right before the Super Bowl that Atlanta hosted a couple years back. And one of his friends approached him at church, and they were talking about the Super Bowl, how exciting it was that it was in Atlanta, how much fun it would be, and just kind of the idea, like to imagine what it would be like to go to it. And then his friend says, well, I actually have tickets to the Super Bowl. And Jamie's like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And then he says, they're actually tickets that I have for you as well. And so he gives Jamie these 2 tickets. And Jamie's like, what are you I can't. It's one of those moments that you're like, you're offering that you can't take it. It's too much. But at the same time, there's not a chance that you can turn it down. It's like, once those words came out of your mouth, I'm not going to let you back out of this. Like, so after a while, he goes and he kind of, he's so gracious and so thankful and great, just overwhelming with gratitude for this guy. And he goes home, and I think he's actually going to take his brother. I think that was the idea. And so they're looking at the tickets, and I don't know if you've had this moment, but you're holding, it's just a piece of paper. You're holding just, it's just a piece of cardstock, but there's more weight to it than that. Like it's too precious for you to hold tightly or anything. And they're looking at the tickets, and they look at the seats, and that doesn't really make any difference to them because they haven't been there enough to know, in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium to know where the seats actually are located or how good they are. And then they keep on scanning, and as down below, it shows how much was actually paid for the tickets. It was $4,000. And in that moment, he's like, oh my goodness. I'm holding a piece of paper worth $4,000. And immediately, he starts to sweat a little bit more, like, I can't believe that my buddy actually gave me these. This is incredible. And his brother says, oh, well, that's what he paid for. He paid $4,000. But do you know what other people are willing to pay for it right now? Like, if you went online to try to sell these tickets, you could sell them for $15,000. You could buy a vehicle with this ticket, right? And immediately, have you had that moment where you're holding something precious, you're trying not to get sweat on it, you're just like, there's sweat coming out of my fingertips because this is so important, this is so precious, this is so, heavy all of a sudden. You don't realize the worth, the weight of it, the price of it. But the price of something is what someone else is willing to pay for it. That's what its value is. That's what its worth is. So, what about you? What is your value? Have you ever wrestled with this before? Have you wondered this before? It's kind of like in those movies where they have there's someone gets kidnapped or whatever, and there's a ransom to be paid. And sometimes in certain movies, there's like this comical moment that when the guy gets rescued or the girl gets rescued, they're like, so what was I worth? Like, what was the ransom? How much, what was the value? What was someone willing to pay for me? You ever had this moment, this idea, this thought? Have you ever wrestled with your own personal value? Well, thankfully, when we wrestle with that question, we have an answer to that. In fact, all of us has an answer to that. Because Peter wrote a letter. And Peter, in the New Testament, we know this letter as 1 Peter. It's in chapter 1, verse 18. He says, "For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed, that you were bought back." Which immediately, you and I, or maybe just me, like, well, hey, if someone's playing silver and gold for me, like that's a pretty good start. Like, I don't feel bad that someone's willing to pay precious metals for me. Like at least there's some value in that, right? That there's something there. Peter's like, no. It's way better than that. He said, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. Now, the full context of that, for us, that might not make a whole lot of sense. Like, wait, what? I mean, I kind of understand. You've probably heard about Easter before. You're like, I understand that there's something about Jesus and like he died pretty gruesome death. So I understand that. But what's with the lamb? So at the time that Jesus stepped onto the scene, it was a temple sacrificial system that was in place. Because from the beginning of time, once God created man, and there was the fall of man, where there was this sin that had entered the world, essentially the recognition that people weren't perfect. Like we make mistakes all the time. But when we sin, we actually separate ourselves from God. And there needed to be something in place in order for us to be made right so we could be in relationship again with God and draw near to Him once again. So the system that was set up was a sacrificial system, that you made a sacrifice for that sin debt in order for you to be made right again with God. And part of that was with a pure, spotless lamb. You'd go to the temple, you would make this sacrifice, and then you'd be made right. Well, what Jesus did on the cross, what God sacrificed, His only Son for you and for me, was a sacrifice made once and for all. He became that lamb for you and for me, that He would redeem us with His life. So what are you worth? The life of the Son of God. You are worth Jesus' blood itself. That's what you're worth. That is the price that was paid for you. It's probably more than you feel like you're worth yourself. No one hears that and is like, that's fair. That makes sense. No, when you understand, when you grasp the full concept of that sacrifice, we're so humbled by that. We don't feel like we have that worth or that value. Now, I'm going to ruin that moment for you, because the same price, the exact same price that God paid for you, is the same price He paid for the person next to you, for the person that you don't get along with. See, Jesus made a sacrifice not just for a certain people group, but for all people. If they would be willing to accept His offering, His sacrifice, what He did for us, this gift, if we would be willing to accept that, then it was for everyone. You see, Jesus, by His very actions, He made everyone someone. Everyone is someone today. And this is where we get off, right? We get off track because if everyone is someone, if everyone has value, that's just not how we see it, right? I mean, we walk into a room and we immediately feel out like, well, they don't, look at the shirt that guy's wearing. Listen to how he's talking, or look what she's trying to, or look at, we see people and we immediately start to categorize them. Do they even go to church? We start to devalue them based on their beliefs, based on their principles, based on their values, based on their worldview. If they don't see the world like us, it's like we discount them. But Jesus didn't, and Jesus doesn't. His sacrifice that He made wasn't just for people that looked like Him or talked like Him or sounded like Him or acted like Him. No, He made that sacrifice for people that believed in Him and also for people that didn't believe in Him. I mean, imagine that. The person that has the bumper sticker that is the opposite of your bumper sticker. I'm not going to name names here, but either one of those bumper stickers, and you might think it's the worst thing in the world, how can they even consider that? Jesus isn't looking at whether he's going to give someone value because of what they believe or their world perspective. No, he's already made the sacrifice. He's already paid the price. God created them, and then Jesus bought them and brought them back. He gave them the opportunity. He gave them the open-handed gift. It is here if you would be willing to accept it. I think sometimes, I think that we grow numb to the value of people. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because there's, population is growing and there's just people everywhere now. So we don't see them for the incredible, amazing, beautiful creation that God put into place. With the full potential and the full value that Jesus declared was true of everyone. You see, if everyone is someone, then everything is changed. We can't see the world the same way. We can't see our neighborhood the same way. We can't see our community the same way. We can't see our country the same way. We can't see our neighboring countries the same way. We can't see the world the same way. Everything is changed when Jesus has spoken to someone's value. And not just one person's value, not just your value, but everyone's value. And because they have inherent value, our perception of them has to be adjusted. When we pray the prayer that we would see people the way that God sees them, that means that we can no longer see them for how we classify them. Who did they vote for? What's their stance on abortion? These things that we feel like have moral and ethical value, and I would say absolutely they do, but that is not the determining factor of whether someone has worth or not. And how we talk to someone, how we treat someone, how we turn a blind eye to someone, how we try to ride our bike as fast as we can and turn up a gravel road at a 90-degree angle when that's a bad idea, but just because we don't want to talk to someone. How are we valuing those around us, those that we have a ripple effect in their life? We try to put price tags on people ourselves. Like that's what we do. We see the world our way, and then we adjust someone's value. We adjust someone's worth based on how close they are to our perspective. Think about your favorite neighbors that you've ever had. Like the best neighbor that you've ever had. Why were they your best neighbor? Was it because they also had a Seahawk flag hanging outside their house? Is that why they were your best neighbor? Because they liked the same sports team that you did? Or because they took care of their house the same way you did? Like they had the same value of gardening? Or what was it? They had kids that are the same age as you? Is that what makes someone important and valuable and worth? Is that why someone's your favorite neighbor of all time? You see, we do this all the time. We put price tags, but the reality is God already put a price tag. We don't need to put another one. He already spoke to what they're worth. And like I said at the very beginning, if we're not loving our neighbor well, then we're not following Jesus very well. Jesus, later on, he gives this final singular command, not as in addition to, but this is a new command to replace. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And by your ability to love other people, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples, that you follow me if you love one another. And then he proved what loving other people looks like when hours later he sacrificed his life on a cross and died for you and for me, and for your neighbor, and for your coworker, and for the person that just drives you nuts, the person that it's going to happen. You're going to end up sitting by them at Thanksgiving, and they're just going to talk your ear off, and you're going to want to argue with them, and you're just going to bite your tongue until it's too late, and then finally you can't handle anymore, and then it blows up. Like that's who God wants us to love also. I think when those moments come, those tense moments come, where we know it's like our margin is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, I hope that we can remember this. I hope that we can actually start to adjust our perspective, that we can place a higher value on the people involved than the position that you hold. It's less important to win the argument and more important that they understand that they have value. And sometimes loving your neighbor, loving your family member, loving whoever it might be, sometimes that's just listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Sometimes it just means that you're going to listen and not say a word at all. They just have all these words that need to get out, and you're like, I don't have enough time. But if we want to follow Jesus, that means that we must. This is not a suggestion. We must love our neighbor. This is a command. This is not just a good suggestion. This is what Jesus commands us to do. In addition, if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're just kind of asking the questions, or someone coerced you into watching this, or whatever reason, like you're still wrestling with all, the whole faith question, isn't that what you hope that God was like? That God created man and then he loved his creation so much that he was willing to pay this incredible, immense price. And isn't it true that even if you're not sure about faith, part of the reason why you're not sure about faith is probably because of the people that are in faith or would call themselves Christians or say that they're a Jesus follower? And you haven't seen that behavior, that perspective that draws you in. You've seen one or experienced one that pushes you out. If you're not a Jesus follower, isn't this what you would actually hope? If all of this is real, if this is true, isn't that what you'd hope? Isn't that what you'd hope? And like I said, if you are a Jesus follower, this is not a suggestion. This is what we must do. This is what it means to follow Jesus. You can't be a Jesus follower and not be loving your neighbor, because that's not following Jesus. Following Jesus looks like something. It means prioritizing other people and loving them regardless of how wrong we might think that they are, by allowing margin in relationship. Now, I got it in here for this week, but I'm going to give you a couple questions that you can wrestle with. Hopefully you can continue this conversation with, maybe with the people that you've listened or watched this message with, or maybe just yourself, to actually put this into practice for you, to actually start to move in the direction of action for you. Here's some questions to consider. To whom do you need to add value? Is there someone in your life that you can think of that you know they need to know? They need to hear that they have value. Who is that? What have you seen that has made you want to abandon this commandment? What's been the scenario? What's been the experience that you've had? What have you had to walk through that you're like, I don't really want to do that. I understand what you're saying, but that's not really what I want. What was that experience? What was that? What was the thing that happened that's keeping you from following Jesus in the way that he loved people and placed value on people and loving our neighbor? And then finally, who needs to hear you declare everyone is someone? Who is it? And I hope, this is just my hope for you, but that as you wrestle with these questions, once you have the answer, that you would do something about it. If you know that there's someone that you need to pick up the phone and call, that they can hear that you declare that they are someone, that they have worth, that they have value, that you would do it. That's my hope. Why? Because that looks like something. That looks like Jesus. That's a step in the direction towards loving your neighbor, as difficult as that might be sometimes. Let me pray for us and we'll finish there. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for everything that you do for us. God, you are good. You are beyond our comprehension of good, that you would place value and worth on us and we do not deserve it. We have intention to try to earn it, but we can never earn it enough. And in spite of our failures, you continue to pour out your love on us, to pour out your grace and mercy and forgiveness and love. And God, I pray that we would receive that, not in order that we would just feel better about ourselves, but in order that we can love others the way that you have loved us. God, I pray that we would start to wrestle with this. I pray that our perspective on who our neighbor is and what it actually looks like to love our neighbor and why we need to love our neighbor, that would start to work from our brain down to our heart and into our actions. That we would start to see people the way that you see them. That you are willing to sacrifice in order for their value to be solidified. And I pray that we would reveal that value rather than try to cover it up or question it. We thank you for everything that you do, are doing, and have done. And I pray that we would allow our hearts to line up with yours. In your name I pray.
Sons and daughters, we will not resist your heart. Come and bring the breakthrough. We surrender to you. Our hope is in you. Come on, lift your voice and say, and let your children's bread. You're tearing down our very gates. As we say, we welcome the healer.
Well, thank you for joining with us this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that actually you've been challenged by this, that you would wrestle with your perspective on how other people are valued and how you communicate that value to them. I hope you do something about that, including that you would come back next week for part 2, A Love Thy Neighbor.